He was now a summoned creature, and his time in this plane depended entirely on her. If it were a slave contract, the summoner's death would even lead to the summoned creature's death as well. Therefore, it was perfectly normal for them to have some mysterious connection. Minga seemed to have the same feeling as Duyuki. She looked up for a moment, then ignored Duyuki again, her voice choked with sobs. "What's wrong? Quickly give Uncle Gorus his medicine." "I have some more here." The person administering the medicine glanced at Mingxi, unsure of what to say. It was obvious to everyone that the old man couldn't even swallow, making the act of forcing the medicine down a complete waste of effort. But could they tell her to accept the inevitable now? How could they say such a thing? Fortunately, a voice suddenly intervened, rescuing him from the awkward situation. "This won't work, even if you pour in 100 bottles of medicine. He can't swallow it anyway." The speaker was none other than Duyuki. Immediately, he became the center of everyone's attention, while Haifu, the magic user Zhou Qian, and others exclaimed excitedly, "Instructor Do here! Quickly examine Instructor Gora's." The moment they heard the title, the onlookers instantly scrambled back as if they'd found a lifeline. Duyuki stepped forward, crouched down, and examined the man. She immediately frowned. The middle-aged man's injuries were clearly severe. His heartbeat and pulse were both extremely weak and his breathing was barely perceptible. "What happened? How was he injured?" Duyuki asked. Uncle, he saved me." Mingxi, the young girl, began to cry. Duyuki felt a surge of frustration. Every second counted and they were wasting time. She looked up and saw the recently acquainted Dui's, pointing at him. "Tell me how he got hurt. It's important. Keep it brief." Dui's raised an eyebrow. The instructor was saving someone when he was struck on the neck by a pickaxe wielded by a vile buffalo digger. "It wasn't a direct hit, though." Duyuki nodded. "About what I expected." Then he started driving people away. "Everyone, make way. Try not to crowd around. The injured man needs more fresh air." Duyuki stood up, giving instructions while simultaneously asking someone nearby for a sharp dagger. He tested the blade with his finger, nodded, then briefly held it over the flames. He then gently pressed his index and middle fingers to Instructor Gora's severely swollen neck. He silently cursed inwardly, thinking, "This man is incredibly resilient. I've seen the shovels of the guilty buffalo excavators. A blow from such a terrifying weapon to the neck, instant death is the only outcome, and yet this guy's still hanging on." With that thought, Duyuki moved his left hand, swiftly slashing across the man's throat. Blood spurted out. He had just slit the throat of the very person he was supposed to be treating. A chorus of screams erupted. At least 4 weapons, near and far, were aimed at him. 3 terrifying spells were brewing, but Duyuki seemed oblivious. His grip on the dagger remained unnervingly steady, without a tremor, as he gently made another incision. Mingxi covered her mouth, completely petrified. In the understanding of everyone on the Arad continent, slitting is murder. A direct attack on a vital point. A heinous act! The Mayudu was already branded a traitor, murderer and criminal. Their next step would undoubtedly be to tear him limb from limb. But the very next second, the previously limp middle-aged man violently convulsed, jumping like a fish out of water. A jet of blood, then a spray of blood mist, erupted from the wound in his neck. His chest heaved like a bellows. And though the sounds from his throat were alarmingly ragged, there was a distinct sense of relief in them. Even a blind man could hear that his critical injuries had instantly lessened. The onlookers were even more stunned. Some even involuntarily dropped their weapons. The rapid succession of shocks they'd experienced was simply too much to bear. Initially, when Instructor Godzilla suffered heavy injuries, everyone was saddened, but because casualties were frequent, it was somewhat acceptable. Even when treatment proved ineffective later, they were mentally prepared. However, at this time, the usually calm Black Axe and Zhou Qian both recommended someone, and this person was a priest summoned from another world due to Mingxi's summoning array malfunctioning. It was said he had considerable skill in healing, so naturally, hope and even high expectations arose. However, then Duyuki slashed Instructor God's neck. Chapter 20. Rest. There's a saying, the greater the hope, the greater the disappointment. The anger, frustration, and madness of the surrounding group at that moment are imaginable. But, after that slash, the instructor actually came back to life! Such twists and turns would make anyone with a weak heart suffer cardiac arrest, using a deathly method to grant life to the wounded. Duyuki's actions instantly elevated his status amongst the group. Although Duyuki appeared calm on the surface, he secretly wiped a sweat. It was thanks to his arrival on the arid continent that he seemed to have awakened some kind of talent in swordsmanship. That precise cut. A PS. The swordsmanship mentioned here accurately refers to the collective use of 4 types of melee weapons: the katana, short sword, greatsword and blunt weapon. These 4 types of weapons are the standard equipment used by ghost swordsmen on the arid continent. What he did was incredibly simple, by Earth standards for a doctor. At least, a patient suffering from laryngeal edema and asphyxiation requiring a basic cricothyrotomy. Duyuki had witnessed such a procedure as a 7 or 8-year-old playing in his father's diagnostic room by high school. He'd performed them himself in the emergency room. Simply put, the surgery, once you understand the structure of the larynx and grasp the key points, is about as difficult as circumcision. Duyuki stood up again, looking around as if searching for something. The people around him immediately dispersed, showing him great respect. Afraid of obstructing his view, he then stepped forward, found a plant resembling reeds, and broke off a stem about the thickness of his thumb. The stem was hollow and hard, similar to bamboo. Duyuki sharpened one end of the stem. To the astonishment, even terror, of the onlookers, he knelt down and plunged it into the bleeding wound on Instructor Gorath's neck. Minxie screamed again at this action, even covering her eye. But when she opened them, she saw that blood and bubbles were spurting from the end of the stem embedded in Instructor Gorath's neck. It was clear that Gorath's breathing became smoother and more even. He even regained consciousness, slowly raising his hand to give a thumbs up. Immediately, almost everyone cheered. Duyuki let out a sigh of relief and instructed those nearby in an hour. You can give him water, but only a little at a time, slowly. If he recovers well, the tube can be removed in 3 hours. He had barely finished speaking when Lu, already grabbing his shoulder, pulled him out of the crowd, practically bursting with urgency. Master Du, a good friend of mine, broke his arm. Please take a look. If he uses healing potions, his arm might become deformed and unusable for weapons. I heard you have a way but haven't sought treatment. Hearing this, everyone's eyes lit up, and they crowded around. Needless to say, Duyuki became a hot commodity in the following period, incredibly busy. Fortunately, he wasn't just an ordinary third-year medical student, he had accumulated considerable clinical experience. Plus, the injured individuals he was treating were exceptionally strong, possessing remarkable vitality far exceeding that of ordinary humans. With the aid of those mysterious and precious medicines, even if he made mistakes, he successfully saved all the severely injured. After the two groups joined forces and exchanged information, they determined the enemy had been severely crippled in the explosion, and the frenzied mutated creatures had been repelled. Therefore, after discussion, they decided to rest at the temporary camp established by Haifu and his team before moving on. Duyuki agreed with their plan. Besides Magia, they now had 2 more engineers skilled in positional warfare. Given enough time, engineers could transform their location into a heavily fortified stronghold. By pre-deploying combat machinery, the risk would be significantly lower than escaping with a group of injured people. Duyuki worked until noon, initially treating the wounded. He could then administer the healing potions, achieving optimal results. After hastily eating the lunch that was brought to him, someone came to fetch Duyuki, saying the instructor requested his presence. The last time Duyuki saw this Godzilla instructor, he was so weak that even breathing was a struggle. Now this man with a full beard was drinking. It had only been about 4 hours. Duyuki was speechless at such a powerful recovery rate. Perhaps sensing Duyuki's astonishment, the Godzilla instructor chuckled, gestured towards a simply chopped tree stump, indicating the guest should sit down, then said, "My advanced profession is unlike others. I am a berserker, a type who can convert pain into combat power. Therefore, I am particularly resistant to injury and my recovery speed is much faster than others." Duyuki suddenly understood. Seeing Minxie sit down beside them, he nodded to the girl. Minxie blinked her eyes and said with a smile, "Thank you for saving the instructor." Duyuki chuckled. "It was my duty, it's what I should have done." The mage, Xuanhuan, who was also present, smiled at Ming-Shi. "Thinking about it that way, your summoning this time wasn't a failure." Little Shi, while Cassiel didn't arrive, it still dealt a heavy blow to the enemy. And the summoned instructor Du is truly unique. I've never heard of anyone summoning someone so skilled in otherworldly medicine. Ming-Shi's eyes lit up. That's right. You're absolutely correct. Du, standing beside them, couldn't bear to listen any longer. Being a summoned being was strange enough, but to have its pros and cons discussed to his face felt incredibly bizarre and unsettling. He cleared his throat. Excuse me, I have a question for you. Summoner Mings, her eyes wide, nodded happily. Okay. Chapter Yo 21. Inquiring about whereabouts, Duyuki took a deep breath, her voice tinged with apprehension. Before I was summoned, I was working with a good friend. We were completely unprepared for being summoned. Cough. In fact, I'd never even heard of such a thing. So when the summoning happened, I was completely flustered and at a loss. I was pulled into a channel and arrived here, before I lost consciousness. It seemed like my friend was also pulled in. Do you know anything about his whereabouts? Hearing Duyuki's words, Minx's eyes lit up. You came through a summoning channel. It seems my rune work wasn't faulty this time. What shape was the summoning channel? Round. Squat. How long did it last? What kind of light did it shine? Oh, right. What did the sacrificial altar look like? What sounds did you hear when the contract was established? It said that the contract god sometimes speaks in Draconic when in a good mood. Seeing the barrage of questions from the young girl, none of which related to what she wanted to ask, Duyuki's face turned pale. Fortunately, the instructor stepped in at this moment, lightly patting Minxie on the head and softly reprimanding her. "Focus, can't these minor details wait?" Minxie was taken aback, her eyes sparkling with Weiqi mixture of Weiqi grievance and Weiqi wrong. "But these aren't minor details! With this data, my self-created summoning array will be much more refined in the future." The less said about that the better, but the moment she mentioned her self-created summoning array, even Instructor Gora shuddered. They had witnessed firsthand the explosive power of that array. They were only lucky that the enemy had absorbed some of the blast's energy when it went haywire, thanks to the grace of the true god. But what about next time? Instructor Goras and the others silently vowed to put a stop to Minx's research in this area. Meanwhile, Duyuki had already mentally composed countless criticisms, mentally labeling Minxie as an academically aheaded girl. There were reliable people around. Zhou Qian's answer quickly allayed Du Yuqi's worries, providing a satisfactory explanation. It turned out that after the summoning array malfunctioned and exploded, their team, while not at the epicenter, was still caught in the blast's periphery. This caused significant chaos and scattered the group. The stormy weather and the attacks from stray mutated monsters only exacerbated the situation. Even now, a scattered squad was still wandering outside. Though they had made contact, among this group was someone who looked remarkably like Du Yuqi, most likely Zhao Qiuyu, who had entered this world with him. Barring unforeseen circumstances, this squad would rejoin them this afternoon and the two would reunite. Du Yuqi was overjoyed. After all, isn't one of life's greatest joys, after a virgin bride, meeting an old friend in a foreign land? He hadn't slept well the previous night, and now, warmed by the sun, drowsiness overcame. He lay down on the grass and fell into a deep sleep. Du Yuqi didn't know how long he slept when he was suddenly shaken awake. He sat up, jolted awake and exclaimed, "Is my friend here?" It was a familiar face that woke him, the marksman Dois. Though they hadn't known each other long, their mutual support and reliance on the battlefield had forged a strong bond. Dois smiled and said, "Not yet. It looks like the weather's changing again. It might rain. You can't sleep on the grass without the sun. Catching a cold is no joke. Don't worry. Your friend will let you know when they arrive." Du Yuqi sighed in disappointment, watching Dois walk ahead, his hands never still. Constantly disassembling and reassembling his revolver, he curiously asked, "Your gun? It seems quite unlike the firearms I'm familiar with." In Du Yuqi's mind, firearms, as ranged weapons, should possess far greater power than melee weapons, yet he had witnessed Du's revolver fire 3 shots in rapid succession, hitting a red goblin, which then managed to escape at incredible speed. The power seemed significantly weaker. Du's reply left Du Yuqi speechless. "Yes, I understand your confusion. I presume in your world, firearms are powered by gunpowder, without the presence of magic. Gunpowder. You know about gunpowder?" Du Yuqi's mouth hung open, completely at a loss for words. Dois used the barrel of his gun to adjust his goggles, then mused. "Let me see. I believe the components are saltpeter, sulfur, and charcoal." Du Yuqi was utterly speechless. How do you know?" Dois shrugged. "You wouldn't think you're the first person summoned from another plane. Summoners have existed on the Arad continent for at least tens of thousands of years, and countless intelligent beings have been summoned from other planes. What's so strange about some information leaking out? But since you all know about gunpowder, why don't you use it?" Du Yuqi became even more puzzled. Dois spread his hands. "Because it's useless. Saltpeter, sulfur, charcoal, maybe the names are different, but you can find the same things on the Arad continent. It's just that when you mix them in the right proportions and ignite them, well, the end result is that it's completely useless." Du Yuqi was stunned. "How could that be?" Dois said. "The laws of the plane are skewed, so the laws of matter are also skewed. Great mages have studied this problem for a long time. Different planes have different laws. Formulas and laws that work in your plane may not work here. To put it simply, coconut trees can survive in hot climates, but in snow-covered areas they will simply die. You should understand that, right?" Du Yuqi said. "That's understandable, of course." Du Zi said. "So gunpowder is the coconut tree, your world is the hot place, and the ice-covered place is the arid continent. The second law of plane energy conservation." Seeing Du Yuqi still somewhat bewildered, Duiza said, "The Grand Magister Ma, in his works, divided all planes into 3 types. Mode magic plane, names high magic planes. Magic is the main factor interfering with the world's laws. According to the second law of plane energy conservation, the energy of the entire plane will fluctuate within a fixed range. Therefore, since your world has no magic, substitutes for magic have appeared, gunpowder and other energy methods. However, since Arid continent has magic, the effects of gunpowder and other energy sources are greatly weakened." After Ma personally traveled through planes, he discovered that not only gunpowder, but even the fundamental laws of the world had changed in low magic planes, such as the freezing and boiling points of water. "Ah," Du Yuqi exclaimed in surprise. This is different too." "Yes. The freezing and boiling points of water on the arid continent, converted to a low magic plane, are -11 degrees and 110 degrees. Even the basic laws of the world have changed. So what's so strange about gunpowder being ineffective on the arid continent?" However, this change isn't too significant. It can be said that even the similarity between a magic-less plane and a high magic plane is above 99.9%. Although differences exist, they are not fundamentally different. Faced with Duzi's nonchalant few words, Du Yuqi found herself momentarily speechless. "Right," Duzi suddenly said. "Can you feel your own spiritual power?" "Spiritual power? What's that?" Du Yuqi asked. Duzi said, "Spiritual power has many different names. Combat professions like to call it Yuan Qi, the Force, or Battle Q, while ranged attack magic professions more often call it spiritual power, mana, or even MP. In reality, though the names differ, they all refer to the same thing, a terrifying power derived from one's consciousness. The most typical manifestation of awakened spiritual power is the mental interference with matter. Not everyone on the arid continent possesses amazing combat strength. Only those who take the step to become professionals can obtain the powerful strength that surpasses ordinary people. And the source of this power depends on one's own spiritual power. Warriors can convert their Yuan Qi into additional incredible strength, while mages can convert their spiritual power into magic. Don't think our combat strength is similar now, it's just because we are only second-order members of the organization at this time, only mastering 1 or 2 simple abilities. However, as a professional, it means there's always a bright path guiding me forward. I can continue to break through, transfer jobs, advance and reach the peak. Those who haven't become professionals, however, will always have a ceiling above their heads, unable to break through. Never able to obtain the true power of a professional. Duyuki suddenly understood. However, Duyuki didn't share this sentiment. This summoning experience was more than enough for him. He'd refuse any similar summons in the future, even if threatened with death. After all, he was just a college junior. Unless absolutely forced, who would want to face life or death situations every day? Wasn't it much better to enjoy the relatively peaceful life of a university student surfing the net, playing games, and flirting with senior female students? About 10 minutes later, just as Dizzy had predicted, dark clouds gathered and swirled, followed by a ferocious wind. The first things to fall were hailstones the size of fingers. Then came a torrential downpour, instantly transforming the world into a white blur. Fortunately, they were all well equipped for outdoor excursions. They had rainproof tents and other gear, and the high ground meant no risk of flash floods. Everyone could relax comfortably inside their tents, chatting away, watching the hailstones bouncing on the ground. Duyuki remembered Dizzy's earlier comment about water in Arad continent freezing only at 11 degrees C. He impulsively picked up a hailstone. Instantly recoiling at its bone-chilling cold, he quickly dropped it. As he was lost in thought, he noticed a flurry of activity inside the neighboring tents. Several people emerged, gathering in the pouring rain. Even the injured Gorus instructor came out, standing with his hands on his hips, seemingly unfazed by the raging storm. Duyuki learned that a message had arrived. The team sent to Rendezvous with them had encountered problems and was trapped, requiring assistance. Hearing this, Duyuki frowned and immediately dashed into the downpour, shouting at Gorus, "Why wasn't I informed about this?" In the torrential rain and howling wind, Duyuki could only shout to make himself heard. Instructor Gorus frowned. "What are you doing? Don't cause trouble in this terrible weather. Don't worry, we'll bring your friend back safely." Saying this, the grizzled, stern-faced man looked at Duyuki. "Stay in camp, rest up, and save your energy. When the time comes to rescue someone, being at your best is the greatest support you can offer." However, Duyuki was not easily persuaded. He stood before Gorus, his eyes stubborn, his lips pressed together as he said, word by word, "If you need my help, I will not hesitate. But I'm going with you. I can help immediately, and I'm definitely not a burden. I've killed several red goblins, even a single adult Luger worm." Gorus stared at Duyuki for a moment, then slowly nodded, tossing him a raincoat. 3 minutes later, they assembled in 723. Reunion. After walking for 2 hours in the torrential rain, they finally arrived at the designated Rendezvous point. A battle had clearly just taken place. The enemy were red goblins. Fighting in this weather, these creatures, with their ability to throw fireballs, clearly weren't the sharpest tools in the shed, and had been routed. As the two teams merged, many soldiers embraced, slapping each other on the shoulders and laughing heartily. After exchanging pleasantries, they began inquiring about each other's acquaintances, leading to both joyous reunions and sorrowful discoveries. Life, joy, sorrow, and the ever-changing world, all a part of the human experience. Duyuki spotted a familiar figure from afar, a hunched form sheltering under a tree from the rain. He strode over, pulled the man up and shared his rain cloak. "Haha, Yuji, I knew you'd be alright." Zochua's joy at seeing Duyuki was palpable, but he looked far less adjusted to this world, appearing haggard and disheveled. They spoke for a while, and Chuyu explained that he'd been unconscious since being swept into the summoning portal. Upon waking, he found himself amidst a field of corpses, terrified to the point of losing his wits. Luckily, he'd stumbled upon Lamisson's squad, who, recognizing him as a summoned individual, spared his life. Chuyu quickly proved helpful, assisting with chores and carrying wounded soldiers. The squad included him, though he remained clueless about what had transpired. After their conversation, shivering and pale, with chattering teeth, Chuyu appeared to be freezing. He furtively pulled out a dark, half-eaten object from his pocket, something resembling a sweet potato. He said proudly, "You must be hungry too. I snuck this from their campfire last night. We can split it." He broke it in half, giving the larger piece to Duyuki before stuffing the smaller half into his own mouth, chewing and swallowing large bites until he almost choked. His ravenous hunger was evident, as was his furtive glances around him. His demeanor was utterly pathetic. But Duyuki felt no inclination to laugh. Instead, a heavy weight settled in his chest. When Chuyu had almost finished eating, he noticed Duyuki still clutching half of the food in her hand. He couldn't help but swallow hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Why aren't you eating too quickly? Don't let them see you eat!" Duyuki didn't know what to say, only managing a half-hearted, "Yuji." Suddenly, her eyes welled up, looking at Chuyu, who was a mess, but with a smile and hopeful expectation on his face. She picked up the food and took a large bite. Immediately, she nodded vigorously, saying, "Delicious, so delicious!" Although the thing was coarse in texture and extremely bitter, and Duyuki had already eaten her fill beforehand, she ate as if it were the most delicious thing in the world, devouring it in large bites. Chuyu was dumbfounded, and couldn't help but say, "Adu, you seem even worse off than me. If I'd known, I would have given it all to you. I could still manage." Duyuki finished it in 2 or 3 bites, then pretended the rain was heavy, wiping her face with her sleeve before saying, "Wait for me here. I was lucky enough to save someone after I got here. I'm going to see if he has any food." With that, he turned left, going directly to find the mage. "Zhou, he quickly returned, secretly slipping half a loaf of black bread to Zhou Qiu. Zhou Qiu's eyes lit up immediately.
"Damn! Adu, you always have a way!"
After saying that, he broke off half and gave it to Du Yuqi, then began to devour his share, even catching rainwater in his hands to drink. Du Yuqi felt a pang of sympathy and went to find Zhou Qiu for a water skin. After Zhou Qiu finished eating, the whole team set off again, braving the wind and rain. There was a bonfire and hot soup at the temporary camp. As long as they persevered, they could soon warm themselves up. What followed was another arduous journey. Traveling through the mud and torrential rain was truly miserable. Du Yuqi vowed never to do it again. After traveling about 3 kilometers, everyone stopped to rest under some large trees. Du Yuqi suddenly felt that the surroundings looked familiar. He looked more closely and realized that this was exactly where he had first arrived on the Arad continent. With this realization, Du Yuqi looked at Zhou Qiu beside him, soaked to the bone in his tattered clothes, and a sudden idea struck him. He went to find the team leader. "Gora's, instructor, I need to go somewhere for a bit. I'll be right back." "It'll only take a few minutes." Gora's, who also seemed extremely busy, nodded in agreement. "Be careful, do you need someone to go with you?" "No." "Good. 15 minutes, is that enough time?" Du Yuqi nodded in agreement and called Zhou to go with him. He clearly remembered that when the dimensional portal opened, several large experimental tables had been sucked in as well. He had even found a pack of Oreos inside one of them. There were also 2 raincoats and several white lab coats on the tables, items normally useless, but now incredibly handy. Soon the two arrived at the location and saw the familiar experimental tables. A feeling of profound familiarity washed over them both. After retrieving the raincoats, they were overjoyed to discover 5 dry lab coats tucked away in a drawer. With cheers they both put them on. Then, Du Yuqi discovered something else in the depths of the table, a small box with prominent warning labels. He flipped it over and gasped. The teacher had just demonstrated the danger of this thing. It was a box of sodium hydride. Thankfully, the packaging was intact and hadn't gotten wet in the downpour, otherwise, things would have been much more exciting. The waterproofing on the adjacent table was poor, showing clear signs of sodium hydride combustion. Half the table was burned, with even signs of an explosion. The damage was significant. Du Yuqi considered it for a moment, then carefully stowed the box of sodium hydride on his person. Chapter Aura 24, Giant Bull. As the two were about to return to camp, Du Yuqi suddenly felt something was amiss. Amidst the wind and rain of the dense forest, there seemed to be a strange. Suddenly, with a whoosh, a hunchbacked goblin with blue skin leaped from the nearby bushes. 2 small flags were stuck in its back. It let out a series of strange cries that Du Yuqi couldn't understand. Then with a flick of its wrist, shot a 6-inch-long icicle towards him. Luckily, the icicle's speed wasn't too fast. Du Yuqi had witnessed ice spears being fired before, incredibly fast, at least twice the speed of this icicle, so even on the slippery ground, he managed to dodge it. Although slow, the icicle packed a powerful punch. It struck a nearby tree trunk with a sharp crack, shattering and ripping a large chunk of bark away, revealing the fresh wood beneath. A faintly bitter smell filled the air. Furthermore, the splinters and fragments of the shattered icicle flew everywhere, cutting several wounds on Du Yuqi's body. While only superficial, the wounds bled profusely, making him look seriously injured.
"Run! Get help!"
Du Yuqi yelled, drawing his sword and turning to the completely stunned Zhou Qiu. Then, he charged towards the screeching blue goblin, but his stride faltered. The bushes nearby rustled again, and another blue goblin emerged. "Damn it!" Du Yuqi gritted his teeth, cursing. Only a curse could truly express his feelings. Fortunately, his situation was difficult but not hopeless. His eyes were fixed on the newly appeared blue goblin's left hand. Hoping they shared the same habit as their red-skinned relatives, a glowing palm when casting spells. As long as he dodged that icicle and forced them into close-quarters combat, Du Yuqi had a good chance of winning. There, seeing a faint glow appear on the new blue goblin's left hand, Du Yuqi mid-run executed a soccer slide. The treacherous mud, cursed countless times in his heart, finally yielded a positive result. Du Yuqi slid smoothly across the ground for 4 or 5 meters, splashing mud and water. The ice cone thrown by the newly appeared blue goblin missed, whizzing past Du Yuqi's face by about 30 centimeters before embedding itself in another large tree. As soon as Du Yuqi got close, he rolled to his feet and, leveraging the sharpness of his weapon, slashed at the blue goblin in front of him. The goblin shrieked, raising its curved blade to block, apparently intending to deflect Du Yuqi's weapon and then deliver a counter blow. But how could that crudely made goblin blade compare to a meticulously forged heirloom weapon? The two met, showering sparks, and the goblin's blade received a deep gash, at least 5 or 6 centimeters long. Mere inches from being severed completely, Du Yuqi immediately swung his blade again with astonishing speed, cleaving the curved blade in 2. The blade's tip flew off, and a deep wound opened across the blue goblin's chest. Spurting goblin screamed, staggering back. At that moment, Du Yuqi felt a gust of wind behind him. He couldn't dodge in time. A searing pain shot through his back as another blue goblin's blade found its mark. Enraged by the pain, he roared, whirled, and brought his blade down in a devastating blow. As the blade descended, a white light, like moonlight, shimmered on its surface, radiating an intense sharpness. Duyuki felt a sudden drain of energy. The attacking goblin parried with its curved blade, but to no avail. The blade was cleaved in two, and the momentum carried on, burying itself deep into the goblin's right shoulder, severing its arm completely. The blue goblin let out a blood-curdling scream, writhing on the ground in agony, splashing mud and blood. The other blue goblin, wounded in the chest, who had been preparing for a sneak attack, recoiled in fear, its eyes wide with terror. But just as it seemed Duyuki had the upper hand, he suddenly noticed something. The water in the nearby puddle seemed to be moving, and not just moving, it was vibrating. What was going on? Duyuki's facial muscles began to tremble. He couldn't help but look towards the depths of the jungle, from where came a dull, incredibly heavy sound. Even the air was thick with a faint, fetid smell. An inexplicable fear crept into Duyuki's heart, then aggressively began its conquest. Then, a huge monster lumbered out from the bushes nearby. It was a creature that looked like a mixture of bull and man, or rather, a minotaur. At least 8 feet tall, its muscles bulged, its mane a rotten black. Furthermore, its skin was covered in lard, festering sores through the wounds. You could see bright red muscle and tendons writhing. A horrifying sight. One of the minotaur's horns was broken off at the base, leaving a deep cavity from which pus and blood constantly oozed. In its right hand, rusty metal pole, clearly incredibly heavy, easily capable of smashing a person to pulp. Thick plumes of blood-tinged vapor billowed from its nostrils, lingering in the rain. This was the source of the stench Duyuki smelled. The minotaur's eyes were strangely vacant, seemingly unfocused. Several flies landed on them and crawled around, yet it remained oblivious, its life or death uncertain. Upon seeing this bizarre giant bull, Duyuki's pupils constricted. Without a word, he abandoned any thought of resistance and fled. What was he thinking? Had only stayed behind to buy Zhou Qiu time to escape, now that his goal was achieved, and had stumbled upon such a terrifying monster. What was he waiting for? Escape was paramount. Chapter 025 Frenzy. 10 minutes later, Duyuki was gasping for breath, his vision blurring with spots. He panted heavily from the frantic run, his untrained body desperately craving oxygen. Lactic acid rapidly built up in his muscles. The resistance from the muddy ground feeling like several hands yanking at his feet. The lack of oxygen left his mind almost blank, making the prickling sensation on his back all the more acute. He was covered in mud, several deep wounds bleeding profusely. Yet he felt barely any pain. It was all because of that bull, that monstrous bull. Duyuki had returned to where he'd separated from the main group, only to find them under attack by goblins, the scene a chaotic mess. Some had tried to help Duyuki, but anyone who dared approach was effortlessly swatted away by the terrifying minotaur, who wielded a steel pole like a golf club. Fortunately, Mingxi hastily performed a summoning ritual, calling forth a hulking figure named Sandor. Duyuki saw him clad in what looked like medieval knight's armor, wielding a steel shield emblazoned with strange symbols, a veritable walking tank. Hope surged within him, but even this heavily armored man was quickly dispatched by the terrifying minotaur. He was chopped down in a trice, then brutally trampled underfoot. A blinding white light erupted from the crushed armor with each stomp, the gruesome scene easily imagined. Finally, he vanished in a flash of light, likely either dead or suffering from severe psychological trauma. Duyuki, who had thought he'd gained a little breathing room, watched this scene in astonishment, then could only wail inwardly and continue his escape. He didn't need to look back to sense the enemy's rapid approach from the slight tremor in the ground behind him and the foul-smelling breath.
Ah, no good.
It turned out that there was truth to the saying haste makes waste. Already pressed, Duyuki hadn't noticed a goblin still clinging to life at his feet. It made a death throw, grabbing his leg, and he tumbled into the mud. Witnessing this, the terrifying minotaur exploded a thick plume of blood from its nostrils, like a locomotive suddenly increasing its power and belching out black smoke, let out a half-suppressed roar of excitement, and violently raised its blood-stained,
rusting iron pole.
If that axe blow landed, Duyuki's only fate would be to instantly become a puddle of flesh, mixed with the night's filthy rainwater. Fortunately, at that moment a figure leaped from the nearby jungle, though his face was indistinct. The figure's pouncing posture was full of power. He seemed enveloped in a faint, reddish mist, and a pungent metallic scent filled the air upon his appearance. Although the torrential rain obscured his features for the moment, his eyes burned with two ferocious, crimson points
Radiating power and madness.
Of course, even more visually striking was the constantly rotating mechanical gauntlet on his right hand, humming incessantly. The gauntlet gripped a huge sword. His attack was preemptive and imposing, in no way inferior to the massive minotaur. Clearly, this person had been lurking in the shadows, waiting for the minotaur to reveal a clear opening against Duyuki before making his daring intervention. The moment he drew near, a terrifying crimson light erupted from the giant sword in his hand. This light possessed an almost viscous quality. After each swing, the blood-red radiance lingered in the air for several seconds, like blood wantonly splashed across the sky, and with each stroke, gouts of blood spurted from the minotaur's body clearly. The sword's passage was accompanied by a subtle, skillful tremor, further lacerating the wound as it was created, inflicting horrific multi-stage damage. Blood frenzy, someone nearby shouted excitedly. After being struck, The Minotaur let out a roar of agonizing pain, staggering backward, seemingly powerless to retaliate. The newcomer, having unleashed 4 or 5 strikes, suddenly raised his sword with both hands in an upward motion. This upward thrust contained immense suction. Even Duyuki, who was 5 or 6 meters away, felt an instantaneous pull, nearly being drawn towards the opponent, simultaneously, as the man raised his sword. The crimson energy emanating from him and the blood spurting from the Minotaur converged on the blade, forming a massive, crimson cross that slowly sliced towards the Minotaur. Blood cross! Duyuki, now slumped on the ground, widened his eyes in astonishment. Watching the terrifying Minotaur writhe in agony under the blood cross, he felt a profound sense of relief and exhaustion. He now clearly saw the figure who had suddenly appeared. The bearded middle-aged man was none other than Instructor Goras. He wore heavy armor studded with numerous metal components. His left wrist was bound tightly by a chain deeply embedded in his flesh, with numerous swollen, distorted veins intertwined with the chain. Strange patterns marred the skin of his left hand, as if it housed a second heart or soul. The middle-aged man, his body reeking of blood, roared a deep bellow as he watched the Minotaur recoil before the relentless onslaught of his blood-red cross-shaped slashes. He leaped high into the air, his greatsword arcing through the sky in a bloody flash, then crashed down upon the beast with the force of a collapsing mountain. Chapter 026, Mountain Shattering. Facing this attack from Instructor Goras, the Minotaur seemed to sense grave danger. It bellowed, purple-black blood spurting from its ears, nose, and mouth. Then, with a burst of immense power, it raised its heavy steel club to defend itself. A faint, circular blue glow instantly enveloped it, a thin but seemingly unbreakable shield. Instructor Goras' previous blood cross slashes had forced the monster back repeatedly, but now, with this defensive power, a ringing clang filled the air. The sound of metal clashing violently, the sound of the sword energy within the blood cross being steadily depleted. The Minotaur stood firm, gritting its teeth and enduring the attack. However, after the full force of Instructor Goras' descending strike landed, it slammed heavily into the earth, sending 8 terrifying waves of bloody energy surging outwards in all directions. For a moment, the earth trembled, almost giving the illusion that the ground was not solid earth, but a surging sea. 8 waves of crimson. This strike, descending from above, possessed a power that seemed to cleave the heavens and earth. Boiling blood-red energy splashed and spread wild, slicing through the surrounding soil, shrubs, trees, and grass, sending debris flying in a spectacular display.
Mountain-shattering strike!
In that instant, Duyuki suddenly understood what Duzi had told him earlier. Don't look at our current comparable strength. Those who haven't become professionals will always have a ceiling above their heads, unable to break through, never able to obtain the true power of a professional. Is this the ceiling you speak of? Is this the true power you say you'll never obtain? At this moment, Duyuki himself didn't notice that as he witnessed all this, his right hand unconsciously tightened its grip on the hilt of his sword, trembling slightly. An irrepressible longing surged within him.
Such powerful strength, I want to possess it too!
The terrifying mutated Minotaur finally crashed to the ground. The protective field it created was finally shattered by the mountain-crushing slash. Furthermore, the 8 crimson energy streams generated by the mountain-crushing slash's impact on the ground, each imbued with immense power, tore horrific wounds into its body, the flesh curling back in a gruesome display, and sent it reeling, losing its balance and falling. As soon as it fell, several people seized the opportunity and pounced, striking while the iron was hot. They all targeted the mutated Minotaur's right hand. The members of this organization were all battle-hardened veterans, recognizing that the creature's killing power resided in that terrifying metal pillar. Without it, its lethality would decrease by at least half. The mutated Minotaur's head seemed rotten and sluggish, even with its weapon-holding right hand severely injured. It still attempted to grab the metal pillar. The result was horrific. Its arm snapped with a sickening crack, and it was finally overwhelmed and killed. After the mutated Minotaur's death, Instructor Goras, the berserker, charged through the battlefield like a firefighter. His strength clearly surpassed the others by a significant margin. The goblin ambushers before him were swept away like leaves in a gale, according to their internal organization, Jokian, Haifu Lu. And others are considered second-order members, while Ming Sai is an honorary third-order member. Instructor Goras, however, is at least a quasi-fourth-order member. Each order is further divided into 10 sub-orders. So the difference in strength between second-order and third-order members is already enormous, and the gap between fourth-order and second-order members is practically insurmountable. Seeing the situation gradually under control, Duyuki breathed a sigh of relief. However, at that moment, a rumbling sound came from underground. A violent tremor was distinctly felt, causing those near the epicenter to stagger and struggle to stand. Immediately afterward, the ground in the center of the battlefield rapidly bulged, forming a mound of earth at least 10 meters in diameter and height. Then, a massive, rotating luminous drill emerged from the top of the mound. The drill had distinct spiral grooves, and large amounts of yellowish-brown mud were flung from it. Amidst a terrifying roar, a huge mechanical drilling machine appeared, covered in thick armor. Thick, black smoke billowed from its 2 exhaust ports. The black smoke touched nearby trees, causing their leaves to wither and curl. Duyuki noticed that the drilling machine's armor was scarred, with some scratches extending 3 to 5 meters long. Considering the armor was over 30 centimeters thick, the fresh, Silver-white curled metal was truly alarming. Then a jet of white steam erupted from beside the drilling machine. Clearly scalding hot, the steam scorched 2 goblin greenskins, causing them to cry out in agony, roll on the ground. A sickening smell of overcooked flesh emanated from their bodies, almost making Yuki vomit. A large door slowly opened on the side of the drilling machine. With a clang of hinges and a low hum, it slowly descended, revealing a red glow flashing repeatedly behind it. Then a dozen white smoking spheres were suddenly launched from within. These spheres, roughly the size of fists, arsed through the air before bouncing and jumping on the ground, emitting a hissing sound and releasing large amounts of white smoke. The white smoke was extremely dense, instantly shrouding the area. The dozen spheres covered a large part of the battlefield, filling it with white smoke within seconds, drastically reducing visibility. Then, a group of dark figures darted out from the drilling machine's door. Chapter 027. The Jester. These shadowy figures, clad in tight leather armor, wielded a pair of gleaming daggers, their movements impossibly fast. The daggers danced in their fingertips, leaving trails of blood in their wake. Like piranhas in a feeding frenzy, greedy, ferocious, and merciless, a chorus of screams erupted across the battlefield. Stunned and bewildered, Yuki watched as his comrades fell around him, their cries echoing in the air. He felt paralyzed, his mind blank. Then, Kyuyo burst through the chaos, grabbing him and shouting with bloodshot eyes, "Run! Do you want to die?" Snapping out of his stupor, Yuki allowed himself to be dragged away, scrambling through the mud. After a desperate sprint of 50 or 60 meters, they finally broke free from the shroud of white mist. Even this short distance, however, left him gasping for breath, his chest heaving, the exertion and tension leaving him near collapse. The others, realizing the futility of fighting within the mist, started to flee, but less than half made it out alive. Yuki witnessed Lu being stabbed in the back, his body stiffening before he fell. Black Axe roared, turning to help, but unbeknownst to him, a blood and mudcake dagger slid silently to his throat. A swift slash and blood spurted. Black Axe cried out, clutching at his neck before elbowing his attacker away. He staggered, wildly swinging his battle axe before finally collapsing to his knees. Face down, his blood pooling into a small puddle. Yuki's eyes burned with rage. Black Axe had been a close friend, and the sight of his death sent a surge of fury through him. Drawing his ancestral katana, he charged back towards the assassin who'd killed Black Axe, his gaze locked onto the killer. He swung his blade. The very air shrieked as Yuki's blade descended. The assassin turned, revealing a pair of chilling, yellow eyes that held no human warmth, and met the oncoming blade with his daggers, attempting to parry the blow. However, at that moment, Yuki felt something strange. A continuous stream of power surged from the inherited katana, instantly empowering him.